The notes for lesson 2 will cover covalent naming and formula writing. So in your gold notes packet, you would be taking the notes on page 2 for covalent. Make sure in these boxes that you write down the steps for the rules, like step 1, do this, step 2, do this. I told my in-class students today that if they want to use the back for the examples, if they run out of space, that might be helpful. But on this space, you will want to have the rules. So when you have new examples, you can apply those rules instead of just having examples. All right, you will also want your periodic table for covalent naming. This is the main periodic table that we will use most often. Covalent compounds do not have ions, so we do not need the periodic table for ions. So you'll just use the regular periodic table. All right, here we go. So ionic compounds, again, as a review, are made up of 2 nonmetals. So they are both going to come from the right side of the periodic table. In covalent compounds, electrons are shared. They are not transferred. So because they are shared, that is how 2 nonmetals can bond. So they don't have a positive and negative charge. They're just sharing those electrons. And 2 terms that you'll see used interchangeably are covalent and molecular. Just know that those 2 mean the same. So if it says name these covalent compounds or name these molecular compounds, covalent and molecular represent the same thing. All right, so we'll start with the prefixes, which are over here in your notes packet. So with covalent compounds, you will use prefixes for the name. So 1 is represented by mono, 2 is, whoops. So the prefixes you will write on the side of your notes packet. Covalent compounds will use prefixes in the name. So 1 is mono, 2 is di, 3 is tri, 4 is tetra, 5 is penta, 6 is hexa, 7 is hepta, 8 is octa, 9 is nona, and 10 is deca. So if you need to pause to make sure you have all those written down, make sure that you do. All right, so naming will be on the left side of your notes. So again, make sure you write these steps down. So the first step for naming covalent compounds is you write the name of the first element. You would add the prefix, one of those. All right, so for the naming compounds, you're going to write the steps right here on the left side of your notes. First, you write the name of the first element, and that name stays the same from what it is on the periodic table. So P would be phosphorus, S would be sulfur. You don't change the name of the first element. You would add a prefix to that first element only if there's more than 1 atom. If there is only 1 atom for that first element, then you do not need a prefix. All right, the next is you write the name of the second element. The second element always, always, always needs a prefix. So even if there's only 1 for the second element, you would add the prefix mono. And the last rule is for that second element, you always change the ending to "ide." So now instead of phosphorus, it would be phosphide if that was the second element in the example. All right, so again, if you want to add these to the back of your notes, if you've run out of space, or you can put it right under your naming rules. N2O, so that first element is nitrogen. We would have to add a prefix because this formula shows us that we have 2 nitrogens. So since we have more than 1 nitrogen, we would say dinitrogen. The second element always gets a prefix. There is only 1 oxygen, so the prefix for 1 is mono. So this name would be dinitrogen monoxide. So you can put monoxide all grouped into one word, or you can put mono-oxide. Either one is fine. Remember that second word, you change the ending to "ide," but if you notice the first word, that base word stays the same. Right, the next example is CCl4. So the first element, we only have one carbon. So if the first element only has one atom, then you do not need a prefix. So that would just be carbon. The second element always gets a prefix. The prefix for 4 is tetra. So this would be carbon tetrachloride. And again, you can write it all as one word, or you can add a hyphen in between tetra and chloride. Either one would be right. So those are the only rules for naming covalent compounds. There's no subcategories. It's just one set of rules. So these are a little simpler. All right, so next we're going to move on to writing formulas, which is on the right-hand side of your notes. So for covalent compounds, we don't have charges that we have to balance, so that makes it super easy. So you use the prefix to show the number of atoms used as a subscript in the formula. And I'll show you an example after we get done writing the rules. So you use the prefixes as your subscript, and then you write the correct symbols and add the number of each element based on those subscripts. So again, make sure you pause the video for a second if you need time to write down these rules, and then we will go through these examples. So phosphorus trichloride. Phosphorus does not have a prefix, so because that first element doesn't have a prefix, we know that there's only one phosphorus atom. The second element has the prefix of tri, so tri means 3, so that formula, would be PCl3. So 1 phosphorus and 3 chlorides. So you don't have to balance out any charges, you just look at the prefix shown, and that's the number that you write down as a subscript. The second example, carbon monoxide. Carbon, again, does not have a prefix, so we know that there's only one atom of carbon. The second element always gets a prefix. We know that mono means 1. So in this example, we would know we had 1 carbon and 1 oxygen, so our formula would just be CO. So this is a formula for carbon monoxide, which is the toxic gas. This is why you have carbon monoxide detectors at your house, because it doesn't have an odor. So if you have a carbon monoxide leak, it can be really dangerous. All right, the last example is dinitrogen tetraoxide. So the first element has a prefix of di, which is 2. So we would have 2 nitrogens. The second element has a prefix of tetra, which is 4. So this would be 4 oxygens. So the answer to this one would be N2O4. So again, no balancing charges. You literally just look at the prefix, and that's the number that you write down after each element. All right, that's it for covalent. Happy practicing.